Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fadwa Wazwaz, and I said I would redo actually the presentation, the video presentation on God the Witness. And there was some misunderstanding on mentioning that name. So I wanted to begin this presentation by helping us reflect on As-Sami' and Ash-Shahid. Now, in an earlier presentation, I went ahead and discussed what God As-Sami' is. So it's the one on nurturing cognition of God. If you go to that presentation, I mentioned also God As-Sami' there. So I would encourage you to go to look at that presentation and look at the section of where I mentioned God As-Sami'. When you want to be heard, you turn to God As-Sami'. You want somebody to hear what you're going through, or you feel the need for someone to hear you, you go to God As-Sami', who hears all. The difference with turning to God As-Sami' and God Ash-Shahid is with Ash-Shahid, there's an issue of not just wanting to be heard, but wanting certification, wanting is this normal? Kind of like processing a type of abuse that is called gaslighting. And all the prophets of God, upon him peace and blessings, believe it or not, if you read the Quran, experience gaslighting. How many individuals have a false understanding of gaslighting? It's like everybody throws the term now. Disagree with someone, they say gaslighting. You have a difference of opinion, they say gaslighting. Whatever, they just throw the term now like water. You have so many like self-help gurus, and everybody is just gaslighting. And what happens when everybody's speaking about something and they have not either worked through an issue in their life or listened over time with individuals who understand what the concept means, is they end up creating a lot of chaos. And in doing so, you have to first clarify that particular understanding. And then from there, I'll take you to the presentation on God, the Witness. I search for somebody because the people always they look for credentials. And so I search for somebody who's a PhD, and I think she gets it. She gets it very well. What gaslighting is and isn't. So hopefully by reflecting on her work and what she has to say, I'll keep it short. And then I'll take you to the presentation and tie that in with the attribute or the name of God, Ash-Shahid. So briefly, if I may, just share with you some of those presentations. Let me get the share button here. Okay. Now I'm in the chapter on Prophet, chapter 12, Joseph. I'll just you to reflect on this here. Said his sons, by God, thou will never cease to remember Joseph till thou art broken, and spirit, or art dead. Or, kind of like the word that is used is halak, Sometimes people will use the word like drowned or shattered, but again, it's try to reflect on what is happening here. He's expressing his feelings toward Joseph, his grief that he's experiencing. Instead of being comforted, this is, again, not one time, because based on what is being said here, thou will never, so it's not a one-time episode, but it's many, 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 many times. Thou will never cease to remember Joseph till thou art broken in body and spirit, thou art dead. So this is a one-time event where he's talking about an experience that he's dealing with which is the loss of his son, Joseph. And he's, getting in response, something is wrong with you. In a nutshell, to keep it brief. This is, by the way, gaslighting. The more than one episode. So let me just take you here. Now she gives here an example of, but first let me introduce her, by the way. She does have a PhD in psychology. So she spoke at the 6th Annual Middle East Psychological Association Conference in 2023. That was sometime in March. And so there's Dr. Ramani. And so I'm not sure where in the Middle East. I think it looks like it's probably Dubai or somewhere around that area. So she spoke. I've been listening to some of her information that she's been recently putting up. And she has done some very good work, and I really think she gets it. So here's how she's explaining it.
So the way gaslighting works is it's a denial of a person's reality. That's step one. That by itself is not gaslighting. Step two of gaslighting is then I think there's something wrong with you. So when I get a person in a relationship and there's infidelity, and they say to their partner, "Is there anything going on that I should know about?" And they're like, "Oh, there's nothing going on. I gaslighting is important. Gaslighting is, but you know, I'm sick of living with a so yeah, there's a step point. Is that it's not only one side, it's a gaslighting. And so, if it's so gaslighting, years, happens in the next point. Now, when we're going to fin, we'll break the other person's spirit. So the way gaslighting works,
see that again, you break the other person's spirits. Remember, first, they denied what they did to Prophet Jacob. But then he had more than one enemy. So it doesn't have to be infidelity. It could be, again, anything. It's not just the issue of denial. But then you go ahead, not just deny. Then you start to go ahead and throw like something of a negative, like you're trying to destroy the person's spirit. Accusing him at that time, like, well, you don't believe, like they make it sound like there's something inherently wrong with you. A one-time event, like they did it just the first time when Joseph was lost, that's fine. But as we can tell from this verse right here, over time, if every time you're trying to express your grief toward Joseph or your grief towards something or your perception of something, and the person responds by, you're shattered, you're broken, you're this, that something's wrong with you over and over and over and over and over again. And they try to destroy the person's spirit. Now, all the prophets of God, they came with revelation, right? And the people didn't respond. Like if you read the Quran, this is the beautiful thing about the Quran is they didn't read the Quran and then the Quran says, they go ahead and say, well, we disagree that you are a prophet and here's why, and this verse, and this doesn't make sense, and they have a conversation. No, it's like you're possessed, you're crazy. And it's not a one-time event, but it's, every time you try to speak, every time you try to share, you're possessed, you're crazy. What's her name? Abu Lahab would chase him around with songs, and Satan left him, So this constant dismantling of another person's spirit, that's called gaslighting. Just want to share some other information on gaslighting to help you reflect on that. I gave you here. I have another one here for you for her. Wait a second. Thought I had it here. Yeah, I did. Just give me a moment. Let me find it. I think it was Kuwait that she went to. I would encourage, this is her site. I did like some of the stuff she shares. I think she gets some of the ideas that some people's, I don't think they understand what they're talking about. But here's, for example, what isn't gaslighting? And this is where some people really create chaos because they introduce something that is not gaslighting as gaslighting.
Opinion. Gaslighting is not challenging someone's beliefs. Gaslighting is not one. Gaslighting is a multi-step process where a person experience of perception is denied. There's something wrong with that. Brings repeat. It just keeps going and going. The person's having a different opinion. I love.
Okay. So then there's this one, just another one.
Because she's a shock recently and saw someone who got really upset when they put the wrong name. And then the person and said, "You're gaslighting me." That's not gaslighting. So that's horrific. Pointed to the cop and said, "You must have a rating problem. That is your name." But the brief are making a mistake, not gaslighting. With a real, it's so very because a lot of people are using gaslighting in the pattern for when they're inconvenient. We from denial of reality, perception, experience, and then this means there's something wrong with you, you have a problem, you're accepted, you're controlling, you're not accepted, whatever that person is. Combination happens gaslighting. Someone getting your healthy name wrong. Maybe quite upsetting, say the righteous feelings. So
I mentioned this because a lot of times people are throwing things that are claiming to be gaslighting when it's not gaslighting. But hopefully you understand what is gaslighting, because I'm going to just reflect on that while I introduce a shaheed. Now, as I said, I mentioned Gada Samia, and that's when you have a desire to be heard. Your perception of reality is not undermined. You're not being called paranoid and crazy. And when you're trying to respond, so automatically when you're trying to respond, so hence you're now undermined. You cannot have a conversation. Why? Because someone already undermined. It's kind of like pulling the rug under your feet. And now you're like, anything you say, you're crazy, you're possessed. And so now you're left into that broken spirit, if you will. You're in that, you don't want just somebody to stand by you, but you want somebody to not just to testify. You know, like if you have a fruit and they have a label organic, for example. Sometimes they can put a label organic, but it's not really organic. So you want someone to testify, to certify this really is organic. At times in our lives, some of the trials, as I mentioned, with gaslighting, and there are others, and I have an article further on in my book about gaslighting, but I just want to briefly mention this because to help us understand when we turn to God as Shaheed versus when we turn to God as Samia. Here we don't just want to be heard, and we don't want someone to just have our back, but we want someone to testify, because you're in this now mindset of, did I experience what I just experienced? Because your perception of reality was denied, not just a one-time episode, but over time. And I mentioned that in my blog. You're left in this, what is normal? This is a situation that happens because your abuser or the impact or whatever it is that you're experiencing not only denied your perception of reality, but they've undermined your ability to even express your perception of reality by now attacking you and saying you're like crazy, you're paranoid, broken, whatever it is. Or they might say things like in the terms of the prophets, you read the Quran, like they didn't come with revelation, as I said. And they said, well, we disagree. This is revelation from God, and here's why. You're possessed, you're crazy. So it puts the person in trying to get at the right understanding here. Like you're now in a state of, you're wondering, are you crazy? Are you making things up? And that's why I mentioned in the last video about nurturing surrender to God, where the prophet now is like, am I like going insane, or is this really like what I'm experiencing is experience? Now you need God, the witness. He's not just bearing witness to what you're going through. He's also testifying and certifying, so you need someone to say, yes, what you experience is indeed what you experience. And no, you are not crazy. You're in our eyes. Look at some of the answer that God gives the prophet. So if you reflect on that, on how God, the witness, appears and manifests to the prophets in the Quran, it's very, very beautiful the way that God responds. So you could tell the difference again from that response, where God, the witness, and God, al-Samia, the all-hearing, if you will. So the importance of a witness during a major trial or tribulation cannot be emphasized. But what does one do if they cannot find one? One of God's names is a Shaheed, the omniscient witness, the certifier, or the testifier. The word Shaheed in Arabic also means martyr, as both in English and in Arabic. Part of the essence of martyrdom is witnessing in life and witnessing on the day of judgment. The one who directly and ever presently observes everything in creation, the one from whose knowledge nothing is hidden. The one who witnesses both that which is seen and that which is unseen. The one who has knowledge of all that always happens, the one who has knowledge of all that always happens everywhere. Most importantly, the one we can turn to and be present with. So what does it mean to take God as a witness? It doesn't mean you go before the public and say, God's on my side. See, that's how sometimes people understand God, the witness. He's my witness. Like, you can't go to court and say, God is my witness. God is not going to appear in court with you and say, I'm your witness. So you can't also obligate God to your point of view. As I tried to get into understanding what gaslighting is and how it impacts the person who's being gaslighted. When you're suffering and you're being abused, try to think of Jacob, Prophet Jacob, and I gave you that verse. Or even the prophet, upon him peace and blessing, when he's being called crazy, what is the term here? Possessed, crazy, possessed. Not a one-time episode, but many, 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 many episodes over time. Then you find an empathetic witness somewhere in your life. First and foremost, you turn to God. Here you don't want someone to vent to, but because constantly having people calling you crazy, possessed, that can break your spirit. Not only is your reality denied, but now you're being undermined and you're being dismantled, psychologically dismantled. And so here you need the certifier. Here you need the witness. And here you also need the one who's going to testify, is going to help you to overcome that challenging situation that you're facing. So we turn to God always, and if someone else appropriate is there, then take that means also. Now, if there isn't another person who can stand as your witness, then God is sufficient. When Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, took God as his witness, he added that those who know the book, unbelievers say, no messenger art thou, say, enough for a witness between me and you is Allah, and such as have knowledge of the book. Again, certification here, and then testifying. So he's referencing what? He's referencing investigate, verify, confirm. These are the terminologies that come when you're thinking of God, the witness. Those who have knowledge of the scripture recognize him as a messenger and a prophet. So it's not an issue of a difference of an opinion. Again, it's about you're asking people to investigate, to confirm, to verify, but you yourself want that to feel comfortable within. Now, just to let you know, an abuser does not see God the witness, because an abuser seeks a mob. Abuser does not care if they're lying or not, or all they care about is that you believe their lies. I hope I got it kind of across through. The person who's gaslighted, like the person who has a conscience, they want to know the truth. Like they want, am I crazy? Is this normal? Am I, they have these type, and I mentioned that in the blog that I wrote about some of the steps that people go through. And so if you want to know the truth, with an abuser, they don't really want to know the truth. They want to be validated. Example of that is in the story of Joseph. Twice we see his brothers first. They, again, came together to defend each other in front of their father. And even they continued, we saw like even years later when they see him in Egypt, they're still defending each other, saying, well, there was a brother like him that used to steal. They're not really caring about God testifying or verifying, if you will, or certifying their narrative. They don't really care if their narrative is certified by God or not. With the victim of such a situation, if they have a conscience, they do care. They do want to know, am I crazy? Am I this? Is this true? Am I experiencing what I'm experiencing? So you turn to God, a shaheed, to testify, to verify, to confirm what you're experiencing, because you're now being dismantled. This is the type of abuse that usually pushes the victim there. So just as with Prophet Joseph, and I forgot the second time that Prophet Joseph experienced this was with, for example, in the kingdom, it was in the kingdom, there was the woman's wife, the prime minister's wife, when she falsely accused him. And then she went into the difference again. She doesn't care if people believe her narrative, or if her narrative is correct or wrong. She's not interested in a certification. She's not interested in it being verified or it being true. Okay, so where does she turn to? She turns to the mob. So she goes to the woman. First, they went from snickering and mocking, gossiping, but with that, you can easily groom them into being your cheerleaders. So they became her cheerleaders. So it's another time, like if you don't really care about God al-Shaheed, you don't care about if your perception or your narrative is right or wrong. You just want a group to stand by you, to validate you. Whereas with Joseph, he turns to God as Shaheed, because now the situation became compounded. He went from one woman to now a kingdom full of women, all kind of like cheering on this type of, if you will, harassment that he's now facing. Now you have to turn to now God as Shaheed. In that situation, you want to make sure that your perception of, always the person with a conscience or with a soul, they want to make sure that their perception of reality is the truth. Just as with Joseph, peace upon him peace, the abuser in your life could be someone close to you. Here, I'm not referencing my own family, but I'm just speaking about the prophets or anybody else. It could be a father, a brother, or a husband, and you may not have any empathetic witness at all. To the outside world, your abuser might seem like a nice guy or a nice girl, just as an authoritarian or an apartheid regime can sometimes excel at PR. At times, the abused can start to wonder if they're crazy. This is where I wanted to show you a little glimpse of gaslighting. If their feelings are not real or not, it can be very dismantling if people are chasing the prophets and they're calling them possessed and crazy. And if they have a conscience, they're not going to be running around looking for a mob that's going to be clapping for them. It gets you, if you have a conscience, you start to wonder, are you Are those feelings real or not? It puts you into that state. You're not going to do like the Zuleika thing. You're going to be thinking like, is this real or not? And this is where it's critical to have a witness. For example, in the Prophet's upon him peace and blessings life, Khadija was kind of that type of witness around his life, where she tried to help him, to remind him of who he was, things that he used to do. That no, you are not crazy. No, she served as a witness. So I discussed, as I said, gaslighting and emotional abuse in a later section, but just briefly discussed it now to help you understand the difference of our need for God as Shaheed versus our need for God as Samir. Trauma therapist Peter A. Levine had said that trauma is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. So again, try to think of someone constantly psychologically dismantling your spirit over time. Not a one-time episode, or like, we all sometimes will say something, but you're not chasing the person over and over and over, where you're trying to break them down and dismantle them. Try to think of that situation, and you don't have someone that can be your empathetic witness. Like at a certain time, as I said, in the Prophet's life, he had his uncle Abu Talib, and he also had his wife Khadija. So they were able to kind of give him that strength when he was constantly being attacked. I gave here an example of Malala when she was shot in the head, for instance, and had the force of the Taliban against her. Externally, she was hurt very badly, but internally, she had a family who witnessed for her and helped her stand up again. They became like her wings. For this reason, it seems, at least to the outside observer, that Malala's trial and tribulation did not turn into trauma, because you have, again, someone there. It's a major experience. They didn't just, of course, shoot her in the head. They threw a lot of nonsense at her. But to have someone there, very strong, firm, empathetic, to help you stand, can help you to deal with that trauma. People become traumatized when they don't have that empathetic witness. For instance, with domestic violence, some people are able to come out of it, and others are not. One of the critical factors is whether a person has an empathetic witness, either family, friends, from stories that I've heard, co-workers, therapists, or someone else. Like they had someone very strong, stood by them and helped them through it. A woman might survive an acid attack, and with the help of her very loving father, the story, another one I heard, and she went on to rebuild her life. Again, it was an acid attack, people standing by the abuser, dumping nonsense at her. But she had a very loving father who stood by her, strengthened her, helped her, and she was able to go on and rebuild her life. A person might suffer much less than this, but with no empathetic witness. Their trials turn into trauma. In this case, a traumatized person often goes on to harm themselves or others. The Quran gives us cases for such cases, so that if you aren't ever experienced something like this, you can reflect on those cases in the Quran to help you, or others to help you, with the trials and the abuse. Now, God is an empathetic witness, but how do we connect to God as an empathetic witness? Now, having God as a witness, excuse me, I went a little too fast, is not about speaking for God or on behalf of God. It's about speaking to God and speaking to oneself, so that when trials and tribulations hit you, you don't absorb them and become traumatized, suffering more than it was meant for you to suffer. So traumatized, then you can't heal. We have examples of this in the Quran and the story of Prophet Jacob and Joseph, upon the peace, who both took God as an empathetic witness, because they did so Even in their darkest times, God carried part of their suffering and turned it into wisdom and light. Now, Joseph suffered, as I said initially, when his brothers put him down a well, but he was also sold into slavery. And then again, falsely accused. Then when the entire kingdom of the women came as a mob, also like supporting Zuleika, and now he's now imprisoned. Jacob suffered when he lost his beloved son. So in chapter 12, as I mentioned, verse 15, so they did take him and they all agreed to throw him down to the bottom of the well. And we put into his heart. Now notice how you face God, the response of God, the witness, we put into his heart that the answer usually does not come from external validation. The answer and the help, first and foremost, it comes by immediately guarding the heart. We put into his heart this message of a surety, thou shalt one day tell them the truth of this their affair while they know thee not. So Joseph knew that one day the truth would be revealed and he was not traumatized. Now, this is not something you can put into your heart yourself. You could do that, mantra thing, but you can't put it in your heart. If you turn to God, the witness, and you are true and you are sincere, then God will put it in your heart and protect your heart from becoming traumatized. And we see that, for example, in the story of Moses, when the mother of Moses put her son in the basket, and then God protected her heart. So that protection comes from God. You can't put it in your heart. But if you turn to God, the Shaheed, and again, he's not just standing by you. What if you're wrong? Someone who has a conscience and they turn to God as Shaheed, then God will strengthen your heart. Either he will strengthen your heart, like if you're wrong, he will strengthen your heart in the case of Adam, like to turn to him in forgiveness, or he will strengthen your heart in that with patience. Like if you ever face a situation where you felt like you were patient, but then you felt like it was an out-of-body experience because you're thinking that just, I'm patient, but I don't think it's me being patient. I feel like something is helping me to be patient. It's kind of like that. So here's where God, the certifier, you turn to God, a Shaheed, like God helps you to be to have the necessary resolve that you need, or the necessary patience that you need to deal with a particular situation. So Joseph knew that one day the truth would be revealed, and he was not traumatized. He was also comforted by the fact that law informed him that he would prevail over his brothers, such that one day he would be able to recount to them their wicked deeds under circumstances so different from his condition at the time that they would not even recognize him. When you take God as a witness, you allow God to protect your soul and heart from trauma, just as Joseph did. One of the very first things you want to do in faith and in healing is to protect your soul. Joseph was the heart and soul of his family. You could kind of think of it that way. And if Joseph's brother had killed him instead of putting him down the well and selling him, they would have killed their own conscience and innocence. Just look at it metaphorically here. However, some goodness remained in Joseph's brothers, and they did not kill him. Instead of destroying the voice of conscience and innocence, they just pushed it away. And this is how sometimes we deal with things. Again, I'm trying to get at here is the issue of the conscience. When you turn to God, the witness, all of them are children of a prophet. Joseph's brothers were not really interested if they were right or wrong. They were interested in kind of covering up and pushing, again, the conscience away, which represented Joseph. Okay, so here's where, again, the issue of Shaheed. They're sons of a prophet, so they're probably still praying to God. because, prophet Jacob is a prophet and he's nurturing them that way, but they push the conscience away. When your conscience is very alive, you're turning to God, asking, am I wrong? Can you certify this for me? So it's not have my back, it's am I wrong? Can you certify? Can you testify? Is this, you're being dismantled. So because you have a conscience, you're trying to figure out what is real and what is not. So again, it's very important to understand that. So just the abuser is disconnected from themselves, from their conscience, but also from God. They're not going to be turning to God as shaheed. When you abuse, as I mentioned before, one of the biggest punishment for an abuser, biggest punishment is that they're disconnected from God. And it's not just in the hereafter, because people they misunderstand the dua where it says, I have to paraphrase it, but there's a dua by Prophet Muhammad. Khizyi dunya, something like that. I cannot memorize it right now. I have to look at my notes. But you seek refuge from khizyi dunya. Now people have took it as this way. Being humiliated by people in the world. Now I ask you, was Joseph humiliated, or khizyi, as I said, disconnection from God? It is not people mocking, ridiculing. Now, who was facing khizyi? Was it Joseph's brothers, or was it Joseph? Who was facing khizyi fi dunya? Was it Zulaykha and her mob, you could say, in the kingdom, or was it Joseph? So if you reflect on that, you'll understand that khizyi means to be disconnected from God. So when you do something, you're not turning to God as shaheed. Your conscience is not bothered at all. If you're right, you're wrong. You don't really care. And you push that conscience away. That's khizyi. You've disconnected yourself, maybe momentarily or temporarily, and as we see with Joseph, but sometimes it could continue until you exit the world. That's called khizyi fi dunya. Other people disagree with me, and which is fine, but that's how I understand it. In his time of need, Joseph was able to turn to God for protection with the following prayer: unless thou turn away their snare from me, I should, in my youthful folly, feel inclined towards them and join the ranks of the ignorant. So again, he turns himself to God, given what the situation. Jacob also was constantly longing and feeling grief for his son Joseph. He was mentally and emotionally abused by his other sons, were exasperated by his continual longing for Joseph and out of touch with their own conscience. Sometimes Jacob was overtaken by sadness, yet he turned to God, and his suffering did not turn into trauma. He said, I only complain of my distraction and anguish or my sadness to Allah. And I know that from Allah, that which you know not. Because this type of when you're needing support, instead of giving him a hug and standing by him and helping him, and I know this must be very hard for you, you're being dismantled. And not a one-time episode, but over time in your spirit. So that's just that you're feeling ashamed. That's where the issue of shame comes in. I think the doctor also gets it. Kashim talks about it, where sometimes when you're going through a difficult trial, instead of the support and empathy, you're receiving shame. Shame for feeling sad, shame for having this, shame for feeling maybe if you're oppressed, anger. So you're being shamed. You're being made to feel guilty. So it's essential to kind of understand those realities when you're trying to understand God, the witness. And he was not swayed from missing his son Joseph. Oh, my sons, go you and inquire about Joseph and his brother, and never give up hope of Allah's mercy. Truly no one despairs of Allah's soothing mercy except those who have no faith. So while he's processing the situation, he still had very good opinion of God, and he still had very strong faith in God. At the physical level, Jacob is in pain and misery, but he's neither traumatized nor broken. Taking God as your witness, as Joseph did, doesn't mean you can prevent trials. This is what I mean. Like, doesn't mean like God has your side, in the sense that you can prevent trials from hitting you. But you can prevent yourself from absorbing them such that they destroy your soul. They will not overpower your heart. First, it's important not to be ashamed of your weakness. Because again, one of the ways when they dismantle you is they throw on you terminology and words that make you feel ashamed of your weakness. Weakness meaning like you're helpless, powerless, voiceless, you're silent, you're bewildered, you're shocked. They'll throw terminology that dismantles your spirit for having those type of reactions to whatever it is that you've experienced. Sometimes we can't understand what's happening. Don't be ashamed of that as well. You don't need to sometimes understand it and come up with like some people will shame you that you don't have some cool sounding conjecture to deal with their cool sounding conjecture. You don't need to be ashamed of that. You can just say, I really do not know. I don't have any cool sounding conjecture to offer. We're human beings, and that's our humanity. Instead of holding that inside, we need to turn to God with our vulnerability and weakness, not to people. Joseph turns to God. His brothers turn to each other, like they also turned to their village from how the conversation took place. And Zulaikha also turns to the mob, to the people, like to the women in the kingdom. So, and Jacob, he turns also to God. So instead of holding that inside, we turn to God with our vulnerability and weakness, not to people. As Jacob said, I complain of my pain and my sadness to God. It's another translation. We can turn over that pain, suffering, uncertainty to God, as Joseph did, sheltering under God's protection. I want to give you a case in past few years. On February 10, 2015, the three young Muslims, Dia, Yusur, and Razan, were murdered in their North Carolina home. In response, their family has built what they call a love army to combat Islamophobia. The family doesn't pretend the loss doesn't hurt, but they share it with God and the community as empathetic witnesses, in the words of one of the family members, Faris Barakat. So it doesn't make sense, and we don't expect him to make sense of it. And for that, I rely on the Most Wise. It hurts. And for that, I know that God will not burden me more than I can handle. I know my brother, his wife, and his sister-in-law are together as ultimate winners. So, but they came together as a family to comfort each other and to be empathetic witnesses. And they did face a deluge of, dismantling for what they were going through, but they're coming together and getting that sort of support, that love army to help and support them through a very difficult time. As I said, Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, one point had his wife, Khadijah, and we cannot undermine that type of support that she gave and stood by him while he was being spiritually dismantled by people who were responding to him saying, I received a message, who already testified before that he's trustworthy and he's honest. Instead of saying, let's look at the message, let's investigate it, let's respond to it, they responded with a cruel type of gaslighting. But at a certain point in his life, God removed Khadijah and Abu Talib, and the Prophet at that time had to turn solely to God alone in that journey to help him weather the continual dismantling and psychological warfare that he had to face. It's essential to have witnesses to our pain so that we don't end up becoming an abuser and oppressor, beginning the cycle with someone else. This doesn't mean we don't stand up for ourselves, and it doesn't mean you just take it. Jacob said, talk to God, complain to God, and allow him to comfort your heart and soul so you feel his soothing mercy. This doesn't mean you don't fight back or attempt to remove harm, but it does mean you do it in a way that doesn't destroy your soul. We shouldn't just be patient and wait and do nothing. That's not what it is about. But while we're trying to remove the harm, it's also important that we don't destroy our own conscience or our own souls. Sometimes abuse can be widespread and systematic. Some abuse that we're facing. It requires tremendous healing at a societal and systematic level. And we still need to turn to God, the witness, and also offer ourselves, kind of like I gave some of the examples with Faddis Barakat and others, offer some sort of like, find groups that can help bear witness in a sense of like what you're dealing with is really what you're dealing with, and strengthen that person. If you have a conscience, you need that. If you have a conscience, you're not seeking validation. You're not seeking someone to cheer for you or applaud for you. You're being dismantled internally and spiritually and psychologically. You're trying to come to terms with, are you really experiencing what you're experiencing? It's that question of, is this normal? So when we ask God to be our witness, this doesn't mean we don't also act to remove the harm. But it does mean we do it with acceptance. Again, it's that people will throw on you that toxic guilt and toxic shame for being powerless. I'm trying to think of the term that one of them like made fun of Palestinians, where all you're able to do is scurry like cockroaches in a bottle, so and that can kind of like build a lot of anger, because here you're being abused and then you're being shamed that you're not able to remove the abuse or stop the abuse. We turn to God as Shaheed. Again, we recognize the abuse, but we don't embrace the toxic shame and the toxic guilt for being powerless, for being helpless, for being weak in a situation which we need power to be able to like push back the abuse that we are experiencing. We recognize what's happened. We don't become so angry that we refuse to accept the reality surrounding us. We accept that, yes, we are experiencing abuse. We are experiencing this suffering. And I like that one recent case by a Palestinian woman whose husband was killed. Can't recall her name, but she said, we need protection, we need justice. And we're feeling like, we're feeling insecure. So she put it out there, but she refused to accept that feeling of shame that's coupled and combined with being helpless. So we recognize what happened. We don't become so angry that we refuse to accept the reality surrounding us. Throughout, we must invite God to be our empathetic witness and our supporter and aid. In doing so, we must win the struggle with our ego, so we are true in our request. Again, when you're asking for God to be an empathetic witness, again, asking him to certify, to verify, to testify like to your heart, so he will guide your heart to what it needs to respond to. That's what you're looking for, is the elevation of the truth regarding a particular situation. Because not only is that person like not agreeing with your version of the truth, but they're responding by dismantling you, by trying to break you down spiritually and psychologically. And that's why you have to turn to God as Shaheed. I will discuss this more when I get to gaslighting, about we need to, as we reflect with gaslighting, I hope we don't just reflect on personal cases where you say, I was gaslighted, because that's, I think, what happens with a lot of situations when people say that. But I hope we can go beyond that and reflect on, did we ever act in ways where we try to dismantle somebody? And not a one-time episode where we said something, but over time, such that we pushed our conscience away and possibly responded like it doesn't have to be like you're chasing somebody like for attraction. It could be like you had a disagreement, but then you tried to dismantle somebody and then you responded by promoting yourself as right by getting a crowd to stand by you, not to support you as you're seeking justice. Like Faris Barakat, they went to court and they're trying to seek justice, not to support you as you're seeking justice, but to support you as you're oppressing and you're going over and over and over again, breaking down someone else. So I hope you can reflect on that. And again, take on any of the books that you would like on, I don't know, some of them are very good, The Most Beautiful Names of God, and reflect, when you're reflecting on a shaheed, try to reflect on a Samia and try to understand, Samia, Al-Khabir, Al-Shaheed. Try to write down cases of where you would turn to God as a Samia, when you would turn to God as Shaheed, when do you turn to God Al-Khabir. Try to reflect on them. Look at more than one book and one speaker that may have written on those names, and try to help yourself understand those attributes of God. And I think by reflecting on them, it will help you of when you need to turn and call on God the Samia, when you need to be heard, when you need certification for something you're going through, verification, and Al-Khabir, when you really don't know what is happening, you turn to God, Al-Khabir, because He knows what's before you, what's around you, what's ahead of you. So I leave you with that. I hope this was beneficial, and thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.